name's Dan Hughes. I'll be walking us through our demonstration on the DxO PhotoLab 4. I've got a grouping of images that I would consider to kind of be everyday photos, and all of them have some maladies to them, something you might want to adjust or fix. And we're gonna make some adjustments to these photos in relatively quick ways, considering the problems that are in the photographs. For today, we are going to be talking about these things, the difference between global and local adjustments and why you might use them, the different localized adjustments, so that's being able to kind of target certain areas in an image and be able to adjust those specifically. We'll talk about control points, how to use them, how they work, the controls that you have within control points and other localized or local adjustments, and then how to use the gradient tool and the brush tool as well. And I'll be honest, as we start, I primarily use the gradient tools and control points. I don't find myself using the brush within PhotoLab all that often because the control points do so much for me, but I'll show you that rather than just say it here. My grouping of images, again, you kind of have to forgive me because the group of images I have here are kind of everyday images, but they're not the best shot images, right? I have problems with all of them, and that gives me an opportunity to kind of talk about making adjustments here and there. And we're going to start out talking about global adjustments, which means when we slide an adjustment slider, or affect an image, affect a control, it's going to adjust the whole image. When we get into localized adjustments, that means we will be targeting a particular area or object and affecting just that area or object. And they're two different things. As far as workflow goes, and I apologize if that's redundant for some folks. I know we've got a whole slew or a gamut of folks here in this webinar, from experts to maybe people who've never even opened up PhotoLab before and just want to see what it's about. So long story short, we're going to crop this image. We're going to utilize some of the adjustments to this image, and then we're going to do some localized adjustments as well. Before we do that, though, I'm just going to press and hold the compare button and just show you what the default stuff does to the image before I even touch anything. So I'm pressing the compare button in the upper sort of left quadrant of the interface here. And as I press and hold that compare button, you're seeing the original image straight out of camera. So you can see it's exorbitantly dark, it's completely underexposed. And then when I let go of the compare button, there are some subtle adjustments that are being made. And DxO is actually doing this for us to try to correct some of these problems that are already on the image. So right off the bat, the software kind of uses its own technology to figure out how to make the image look as good as it possibly can right away, right off the bat. It's a really nice feature. For anyone interested, you can turn that off. If you don't want DxO PhotoLab to adjust to this stuff right off the bat for you, you can turn it off. But what I've found is that I'd rather have it on because it does a good job to correct maladies like this one, being underexposed and not having this sort of range of tones that we might want. All right, so all of that said, I'm gonna just make sure that my workspace is set. Well, we'll leave it in the what's new in PhotoLab. That'll actually be helpful. Mind you, as I've moved up into this top toolbar here, you can change your workspace within PhotoLab to kind of be a more customized workspace for your own work. So I have an infrared process. I have my own sort of workflow that I use. And then there are three workspaces that come standard or built into the DxO software. You've got DxO Standard, Advanced, and What's New in PhotoLab. And what these do is they just change the tools palette over on the right side. If I just click on DxO Standard, you'll notice the tools palette changes over here on the right side. I'm going to go ahead and leave the What's New in PhotoLab up, and we'll deal with it within that workspace. But I guess I like to mention this because if you've just opened the software for the first time to follow along, it's important that we're kind of in the same workspace. The other thing that I kind of skipped ahead into is right now I'm in the customize portion of the interface. There is a photo library portion as well. And this is basically a browser-based software. So right now we are within this folder on my Mac computer. And so we're in that folder and we're looking at the images that I've sort of chosen or picked out for our demonstration today. If I wanted to go to other images, you would just navigate through your desktop or your hard drive or whatever, however you organize your computer, you'd basically navigate that way on the left side. It's a nice way of working. There's a lot of really cool features in the photo library as well. We're not going to talk about much else about it because we've got enough to talk about with localized and global adjustments. So I've clicked back into my customized section. And actually the first thing that I want to do in this case is just crop the image, because I know that I want to crop out the right side of the photograph. And this is a very common tool that I use, I mean, in my everyday images for sure, but in any kind of photo post-processing. I often don't get the composition exactly how I want it to be in camera, although I try. And so I correct it afterwards. So if you follow my cursor over to the right side, we're going to go into the crop tool, and it will actually automatically crop for us. And this is a really interesting feature, because if I go to my aspect ratio and I say, okay, I want this to be a 1:1 ratio, which means it will end up being a square image. If I click on that, it'll just choose. It thinks it knows the best possible composition. It'll use its own algorithms to figure that out. I don't actually want this aspect ratio to be square. So what we're going to do is click on the aspect ratio. You can use unconstrained, which basically means you can crop any way you see fit. I tend to stick to the kind of traditional compositions or traditional aspect ratios for the most part, unless I have a direct application, where if I know that I'm going to be putting an image up on the web and I need it to be a banner, I would crop it differently because of that. Or if I know I'm going to print the image, I might keep the aspect ratio the same, or sorry, a traditional aspect ratio, that is one of these kinds of presets here, so that when I print it, I can easily matte and or frame the image without it costing a boatload on custom framing. Okay, so I've changed my aspect ratio to a 5:4, so I could print it as an 8:10 or a I don't know, 16:20 or standard, sizes, but it's not cropping exactly how I want it to be. So I'm going to go into the manual correction, and then I'm going to click on the tool itself, and this is going to allow me to just crop the tool exactly, or the image exactly how I want it to be. I'm going to use the kind of rule of thirds for the most part for this image. So one of the beauties of the crop feature here is that we have the rule of thirds right off the bat, and it's a grid that you can turn on or off. But this is helpful because these little cross points here are called power points, and they are the areas that are highly effective to put your subject in for compositional purposes. Probably not a big deal for everyday images, but it's a nice feature to know it's here to kind of optimize your composition. Anyways, we've got the composition how I'd like it to be. I'm going to click the close button in the lower right corner of the crop tool. And one of the things that you'll notice, ladies and gentlemen, as we move through these different tools is that right now we're on the crop tool. So we have a little tool set down underneath the image itself that allows us to augment and change the crop and how the crop tool is sort of operating. And that's going to be important because when we go into local adjustments, we're also going to be talking about some of the features or the tools that are in this part of the interface that will be different than what it looks like right now because we're in the crop tool specifically. All right, so I'm going to click close. From there, I'm going to move into my basic tools. I think I'm happy with my white balance, although if I'm not, we're going to, actually, I know I'm not, we're going to change that in a little bit. But before I change my white balance, I'm going to adjust my exposure. So we're going to turn the exposure compensation tool on, and I'm going to take this exposure slider up and to the right a little bit to get a little bit more detail out of our image. I do like that we have, this is my friend Travis, and he's flying his drone from a few years ago, and he's making an adjustment to the camera. This was just sort of a candid shot of him, and I liked it, but I kind of prefer that it's a silhouette like this. I like the little bit of light on his glasses and the little bit of light that's sort of hitting his shirt here. And long story short, I wanted to brighten it up a little bit with the exposure slider, but not too much. But if you've never used an exposure slider before, this tool, if you slide it to the right, it attempts to brighten the image, and it's trying to do it in what's called a stop, which is a photographic term for doubling or halving the light. I've brought it all the way up to 4 stops. We're not going to leave it this bright, but basically, if I set this down to 1, so if I set that at 1 right there, we've doubled the amount of the brightness, basically. It tries to emulate what would happen if you were to do that in camera. In this case, I'm going to just bring this back down to be, how about 3/4 of a stop, so 0.75 or so. So now we've got a brighter image, but I still have my silhouette. Now that I've done that, I actually am noticing that my image is a little bit cool. So we're going to globally warm the image up. In a normal image, we could likely just go into the setting here where we have a drop down or a pop up, and this is full of these nice presets, which are common color temperature settings. And what these are actually is common light sources. This was shot probably in the shade or possibly in a cloudy situation. It's not really, but the image was shot just after sunset. So I think if I click on daylight, it's going to be incorrect. Although I actually like what it's doing in the daylight setting. And that's the beauty of this, is if we didn't, we can just go in and change this to flash, to cloudy, and we are not working in a way that hurts the file. So we can make these changes to the image, see what's happening, and if we don't like what it's doing, we can easily go back and change it. So I'm going to leave this on daylight. I like what's happening there. And I'm going to then move into our temperature slider, and I'm just going to go ahead and actually make this a little warmer with the tint. Now, I've skipped over the color picker. We're going to talk about the color picker in a little bit, but we're going to talk a little bit about the color temperature slider and the tint slider, because we've used a preset within the settings, and then I'm going to move into my temperature slider, and I'm going to be able to warm or cool the image however we want, right? And I start with my preset as a starting point, and then I kind of go in and massage the tones to get exactly what we want. And the beauty of this is it's a sunset, right? So we're able to kind of go in and change it however we see fit, and it'll still be pretty believable, because any of these colors could exist in an actual sunset. Let's say we like that. I love what's happening with the overall sort of warmth, but I definitely want to get a little bit of color in the sky here. So in a few minutes, I'm going to show you how to create a gradient that's going to change the color so that we'll have a nice cool blue sky, and then a nice warm sort of sunset over the water and over the horizon itself. In fact, I think we can probably just skip right into that, because I don't know if we need to do any other global adjustments. All of these adjustments and sliders on the right here, they are global. As we adjust them, they are affecting the entire image. If we move into the local adjustments tools, so follow my cursor into the kind of upper right quadrant of the interface here, top rightish, we'll click on local adjustments. And in local adjustments, we have the ability to create what's called a mask. And then we can adjust the affected area of the mask. And in broad terms, what this means is we can call out different areas or individual objects in the image and control them selectively without having to even make any sort of complex or complicated masks, because of the really cool mask capabilities within PhotoLab. Before I add a mask, I just want to point your direction down here to the bottom portion of the interface. I'm going to explain these buttons in just a few minutes. I just wanted to point out that these are now different than they were when we were dealing with the crop tool, right? And I probably don't need to mention that, but a lot of the different tools have different tool interfaces down here that are specific to the tool that you're in right now. All right, so if I wanted to add a gradient to the sky here, so I want to cool the top of the sky and leave these tones alone, what I'll do when we've clicked on local adjustments is right click to bring up what's called a heads-up display, right? And this heads-up display is how we're able to choose from our different localized adjustment tools. We have a brush tool, we have our gradient filter, which is what we're going to use in a second. We have control points, there's an auto masking brush tool, and then there's an eraser, a new mask, and a reset, or like an undo tool. So we'll get into all 8 of these, or is there 7? There's 7 of these buttons in here in the next few minutes. For now, let's start with a graduated filter, or the term I was using was gradient, but it is a graduated filter. So I'll click on graduated filter. For those of you who are film photographers or anyone who makes photography with filters and neutral density filters probably, that's the same term, it's a graduated filter. The beauty of doing this in post-processing is that we have very different controls than if we were to do this in camera with a set of filters, or like a glass filter that you put over your lens or whatever material you might be using. Long story short, I've clicked on that graduated filter tool, and what we're going to do is click on the area that I want to start to adjust and drag. Right, and so as I click and drag, this is going to create a gradient, and the place that I've clicked on will be the most dramatically adjusted. And then as I work down to this point here, we won't have any of the adjustment made, and I'll show you exactly what that means, but it's kind of a good thing to explain right off the bat. So let's go into this. Anytime you use any of the local adjustments within PhotoLab, you will make your selection. So in this case, the graduated filter, and then once you click that filter on, if you will have 3 different sections or sets of tools to be able to control that area. This one here, which might be a little bit hard to see depending upon your screen, this is it looks like a sun, and it's the light designated tools. So these are the tools that adjust the brightness levels. These tools here, it looks like 3 little filters, or 3 little circles there, sort of joined together. Those are your color tools. And then this last one down at the bottom, which looks like a little lens almost, are your detail tools. In detail, you can sharpen the image or blur it. In color, you can control vibrancy, saturation, color temperature, and a few other things. And then in your light adjustments, you've got brightness or exposure, contrast, and some other density adjustments, or if you will, brightness adjustment tools. In our case, with this gradient, I'm going to click on color, and I'm going to shift my color temperature. And this is one of my favorite tools, by the way, within these selective adjustments. The fact that I can control the color temperature of a particular part of an image selectively is a really interesting way of making adjustments to your image. So in this case, I actually want my sky to be more blue. So I'm going to take the temperature, which was somewhere up here in about the 5,000 range, and I'm going to bring this down and cool this off to make my sky more blue. Right, and I can bring it all the way down to 2,000, and it's going to make everything really blue there. And I don't know if I want to do that necessarily, but I love this kind of gradient where we go from a very cool blue sky to this warmer area next to this horizon, and then the blue down here or purple down there. Let's see. So I've clicked on my temperature and my tint, and I'm just making some subtle little adjustments. And what you can see is happening now is I've got my blue sky up here, and then there's this nice soft gradient from the area up here that's being dramatically changed in adjustment, or in adjusted, down here to where Travis's head is, where there's none of the adjustment taking place. In fact, if we click out of it, so if I just go ahead and click here, or if I click close, we can get a sense of what's happening. By moving in, I'm going to minimize some of these tools on the right side. And on the right side here, oops, we have our local adjustments. So I'm going to open this tool. And in the local adjustments section on the right side of the interface here, we're able to toggle our effect on and off. So you can see the before and the after with just that one gradient. And it just has created this nice color contrast on the image, which is going to give me this nice sort of sense of depth almost, or a different sense of the image. And I don't know if we need to do much else, and we're already 22 minutes into our time. So I say, rather than messing around more with this image, let's go and correct some other problems that we've got with some of these images. So this is a friend of mine I went camping with last summer in Lake Champlain, which is northeastern New York, and it is definitely not an ideal picture for numerous reasons. DxO has already fixed some of those problems. If I click and hold the compare button, you can see the image is dramatically underexposed, and DxO, the PhotoLab default software, default tools are just going to fix that for me right off the bat. Apparently my finger was in front of the lens, or something was down here in the lower right area. I'm just going to crop that out. Although, let's try something. And I didn't plan for this. It might not work, but if you follow my cursor up into the sort of upper top portion of the workflow, or interface rather, there's a repair button. And this repair button allows us to clone or heal, which allows us to remove and reinterpret the pixels down here. This would be a very big area to try to clone out, but let's see what happens if I just clone this. I'm going to show you a successful use of this tool as well. Basically, I'm just going to go in and paint over the area, the egregious area that I want to get rid of, and I'm going to let that sort of crunch, and it's trying to fix those issues for us. It's not doing it perfectly, but I'm also asking quite a lot of the tool to try to go and correct that for us, although it's pretty close now. So I went in and I switched from the clone tool to the repair tool, and we've basically fixed that lower right corner. It's not perfect, but it's better than having my finger in the frame. I say we still crop the image. This is just a really handy, simple to use tool that can allow you to clean up areas of images where you've got pixels that you don't want. Like, for example, there looks like there's a little string or rope right here. I bet you if I take this size down of the actual brush size, and then I go and brush over that, it will just take care of that for me. So it just cleans that up. That could be really nice if you have distractions in the background, or like there's a Coleman tag on this tent back here. Let's see what happens. Oh, I made a hole. Okay, so I don't like what I did. I'm just going to tap Command Z, which is the shortcut to undo, and it goes one step back. We could try that with a repair, but that's not what we're here to talk about. I'm going to go ahead and close that repair tool. It's a nice little feature, and it allows us to remove those problem areas. We are going to crop this image. So I'm going to click into the manual crop. I'm going to keep my aspect ratio the original 2:3 ratio, and let's pull this up from the corner and then recompose Nate. I'm happy with that. Maybe a little more headroom without cutting off his elbow. And we're just kind of fixing the composition up, right? That crop tool does a lot of work for us. All right, so now, in general, you know, this is a not run-of-the-mill image, but this is a photograph of my friend Nate. I might want to use this to, you know, send off in my newsletter, or post it, or send it to Nate if he likes this photograph. By the way, I did adjust my settings in this situation and shot a couple images that were better exposed, and probably nicer versions of this. His smile's sort of forced in this case, but let's fix those issues. Let's fix the fact that the skin is underexposed, and there's a contrast difference from where the sun is compared to where the shade is, and we can redirect the viewer, redirect your eye as the viewer, in a way that will look real and natural, but is very quick and easy to kind of fix this image up really nicely. The first thing I'm going to do is go into my exposure compensation. We'll make a few global adjustments, so I'll just brighten the whole image, just maybe half a stop, 3/4 of a stop or so. We'll go into our selective tone. There's construction starting above me. Hopefully that doesn't get worse. Hey, Lori, can you guys hear that?
We can hear a little bit, but we can
Okay.
still hear you over that.
Okay. If it gets bad, let me know, and I'll just move rooms really quickly. All
Okay.
right. So moving into our exposure compensation, I just raised the exposure a little bit. I'm also going to move into my selective tone. The selective tone tool allows you to control the highlights, midtones, shadows, and black tones separately from each other. So whereas the exposure slider allows you to brighten or darken the entire image sort of equally or in a way that camera exposure might work, the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows allows us to control the individual tones. So my shadows are the darker values in the image, and I'm able to brighten those up. And then if my highlights, like if these areas were too bright, I would be able to take my highlight slider down and to the left and darken it. I don't really want to do that in this case. I just thought it might be a good example to show you. I'm just going to brighten the shadows up subtly. From here, we're going to use 2 gradient tools and 1 control point to redirect your attention to our nice smiling friend Nate. So to start with, let's use those gradients again, because, or rather, graduated filters again, because we've already done that, and we can do that pretty quickly at this point. So I'm going to darken down this corner by clicking over here and dragging. And what I want to do is I just want to kind of make sure that I'm not going to be darkening Nate down. So I'm going to let the end of the gradient not touch Nate. I'm going to get it pretty close, but not go right into him. And then from there, I'm going to click into the light adjustment tools, and I'm just going to take my exposure down a little bit. We don't have to go crazy with this, but I can take that down half a stop, and then the right side of the image isn't going to be as bright, and therefore, when we brighten Nate up, your eye is going to sort of look more towards those brighter sections of the image. All right, so we've darkened down that side. Let's go over to this side. I'm going to click the new mask button. So mind you, we've made 1 mask, we've made our adjustments, and now I'm ready to make a new mask. So I'm going to click the new mask button. I'm going to go ahead and click over here and drag. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and darken these tones back down. So we're going to, it's called burning. So if you lighten an area in a photograph, you'd call that dodging. And if you're darkening an area, we'd call it burning. So we're going to burn the corner a little bit, maybe half a stop as well. And this is going to allow us to, again, kind of rebalance the image, even though we're working in these subtle adjustments of, you know, less than half a stop at a time and so on. So there we are. We've got our gradient or graduated tool. From there, I'm going to click the new mask tool again, or actually, rather than clicking the new mask button, you can actually just right click on your image. So anywhere in the image plane or image area. And now I can click new mask right in here. So that could be nice. I'm working on a laptop screen, and it's a relatively small screen, so it's easy for me to jet down to that lower right corner and click new mask. But if you were on a bigger monitor, maybe you just want to right click on the image and go to new mask. And then from there, not only do I need to do new mask, but I need to do a control point. Let's talk about these control points, because a graduated filter allows you to apply a gradiated kind of adjustment. Control point actually allows you to click on an object, and it makes a selection of that object for you, right? And I'm going to size the area to make it smaller. I'm just going to kind of encompass Nate's head, and we're going to just brighten him up just ever so slightly. He's got a little bit of a sunburn. We were outside quite a long time, several days. So I'm going to go ahead and cool him off a little bit by taking my temperature down. And this is going to keep him looking nice and tan, but kind of remove a little bit of his sunburn. We could even shift the hue, but I'm just going to do a little bit of that color temperature. And when we're done, we're going to click the close button. I just want to show you what we've done so far, because it took us maybe, what, I don't know, 7 minutes to talk about that, but we did maybe 30 seconds to a minute's worth of actual work. And if we click the compare button, you can see the original image without global or localized adjustments compared to what we've done with these localized adjustments and a little bit of global. Let's take a look at what the specific local adjustments are doing as well by moving to the right side of the interface and just turning those off and on again. So as I turn them off, and if you kind of like lean back in your chair and you look at this image, I think your eye is going to be kind of attracted back to that tent in the background. As we turn the local adjustments back on, now I've sort of slightly darkened down that background, slightly brightened up Nate's face. And now when you lean back in your chair, I think your eye is going to kind of be more attracted to the brighter volumes and areas of Nate's face. So this is a really simple and nice way to be able to control the areas of your image and objects within your image. So let's do this one more time. I'm going to add a little more texture into his shirt with a control point. So I need to click my new mask button, and I'm going to click and drop a control point on his shirt. We're going to go into the light adjustment tools, and I'm going to use 2 of these contrast adjustments that are going to bring out a little bit more texture in his shirt. As a side, the control point selections are probably the easiest part of the control points themselves. You literally click and place the point on the object you want to adjust, and then you size the area by clicking on that circle that's going around the subject or the object. And what's happening is the control point is going to make a selection of that object. It's not making a selection, a circular selection. It's making a selection inside of the circle of that object in a very photographic looking way as well. So when we make our adjustments, they will translate in a way that look clean and natural. So I'm going to increase the micro contrast just for a little bit of texture on his shirt. I'm going to increase a little bit of contrast. And as I make these little subtle adjustments to kind of, again, draw your attention in towards Nate a little, I mentioned that making the selection is the easiest part of the control points. In my mind, the harder or more difficult part of using control points or localized adjustments is deciding which tools to use, right? Like, why would you add some contrast to his shirt and brighten up his face? Well, he's the subject of the image. And your eye, the viewer's eye, or the human eye, is going to be attracted to the human form and figure and face, the brightest stuff within a picture, the most contrasty and sharp things within an image, and then the most saturated portions of the image. So if you want to bring out or emphasize your subject, oftentimes you will brighten your subject and you will darken things you don't want the viewer to look at. If you want to, distract a viewer away from the background, you darken it down a little bit, maybe even remove a little bit of the color, and that's going to allow for a sense of depth in the image, and then it's also going to redirect the viewer's attention. Again, if I turn the localized adjustments off and on again, I've explained this over the past, 12 minutes or so, but we've done just 2 minutes worth of work, and already we can sort of attract or direct your attention as the viewer to the important parts of the images and away from the not so important parts of the image or images. So with that, I'm going to click this close button, and we're going to keep moving. So let's see, let's click on this cat picture. And I think with this one, I don't have too many things that I'd want to do to this photograph. I kind of just like this photograph of this cat looking super regal. Maybe we crop the image, but this is a good image to try out that repair tool. And while I know that's not necessarily what we're here to talk about in terms of global or selective tools, it's a nice feature, and it's a tool that I find myself using on images that are, well, any kind of image, but definitely to clean up my sort of candid photos or images of just family and friends, which is what we're kind of here to talk about. So to explain a little bit more, the repair tool, you have a clone version and a repair, and what those things do is this tool allows you to augment or remove or change pixels, right? So we've got some scratches that are on this facade of this table here, and they're not the worst in the world, but it would be nice if they were cleaned up, right? So what you would do is either choose repair or clone. Each one works in a slightly different way as where it's going to sample the pixels from. And then I'm going to size my brush to the size I think I need, in this case, about 22 or 23. And then, by the way, the feather and the opacity. The feather is the hardness of the brush. So if I go and I try to replace some pixels here, watch what happens if I just click over here. I don't even know what, yeah, it doesn't really do much. Let me see if I go up here. If I try to, repair some of the cat's side here with a hard brush, it's not noticeable at all because the tool's too smart for me. Anyways, the feather, this slider is the hardness of the brush, and the opacity is the kind of amount that those pixels will be replaced. At 100%, when I go and click on this little scratch and drag my brush over it, it's basically going to get rid of it for me. It's just going to go find better pixels for that area, and it's going to clean it up. If I were to bring my opacity down to, let's say, 10% or so, now I brush over this, I'm going to have a very low opacity. And so it'll kind of work, it'll work to reduce that distraction or that scratch there, but it won't get rid of it, right? And so you might do that in situations where you don't want to completely replace the pixels. You just want to kind of hide maybe a malady or a problem, or it could be hypothetically used for skin retouching, where you're reducing the tone of a blemish on somebody's face or something like that. So anyways, I'm going to go through here with my repair tool, and I'm just going to clean up all of these scratches one at a time. So I'll clean it up. Let's go over each one. And what the tool is actually doing is I'm telling it what I want it to fix, and then it figures out what pixels it needs to take from some other area to clean it up. So it's a smart tool that kind of understands what's going on with the edges and the areas of the object. All right, I'm going to click the close button here. That's going to clean that up nicely. That's kind of all I really wanted to do on this image, I think. So we'll keep moving. And in fact, we're getting on to about 3:39. So let's move into a kind of problematic situation and scene, right? So here's a nice sort of candid shot of us. This is some of my friends and I. We were in New Orleans. I guess it was early 2019. Yeah, that sounds right. And anyways, we're about to order some food, and we wanted to get a group picture, so we did. And what happens when you hand off your camera to somebody is you definitely can get really good results, and other times you get some not so great results. Thankfully, I set up the camera so we could get it the best we could. I want to crop this image, and then I want to show you some more of those selective tools to fix some of the color problems that we're running into, while not sort of removing the essence of the scene, right? Because we could clean up our skin tones to be perfect, but then it's not going to make sense for the scene because the lighting in this situation is how it is, and we want to retain that. So let's click the crop tool. I'm going to turn this to manual. I'm going to actually, let's see what happens if we leave it on the original aspect ratio. And let's just go ahead and just crop this down. And we'll put Aaron at this spot here, this sort of power spot. I'm going to click the close button. And there we've just sort of cleaned up the right side of the frame. From there, let's use that repair tool. I find myself using the repair tool pretty often with these kinds of candid shots as well. So what the heck, why not go ahead and use that every single time on the demo? So try and get rid of that. It's not always totally perfect, but you can kind of go in and start cleaning up areas that aren't totally perfect. And in my mind, this stuff doesn't have to be totally perfect. As it's a candid shot, no one's ever really going to notice that this is a little bit messed up here. If we needed to, we could spend some more time cleaning that, but I think we should focus on utilizing the brush tools and some of the other features within our localized adjustments. So in the local adjustments section, I'll click into it, and this time we're going to use the brush and the edge detection, or the auto brush here. And I'm going to kind of blur the background out a little bit and try to fix our skin tones a little bit with some control points. So I'm going to click on the auto mask, and I'm going to enlarge the size of my brush. And we should probably talk about what's happening as we go in and I try and make this selection in here. So I'm going to just brush this in, and the idea is that this brush can kind of figure out where the edge of these things are and I don't have to be super careful in making my selection. Although I did kind of mess up a little bit, and I went over on Aaron's head right there. So I'm going to show you how to clean that up with the eraser tool in just a minute or so. Before we do that, let's move into our blur tool. So I've clicked into the sharpness section, or the detail section rather, and I'm just going to take my blur, and I'm going to blur the background. If I take it too far, it's going to be very noticeable, right? So what I'm going to do is just bring my blur up a little bit, maybe 10 or 11, and what that should help us to do is reduce the sharpness in the background, which is pretty distracting, and that's going to give us a little bit more emphasis as our group photograph. I'm also going to go ahead and just brush this in up here. I'm going to attempt to clean it up afterwards with the eraser tool. So the idea of the edge detection is it should recognize the edges of these things. Oh, I've gone way over on my head here. I'll go ahead and I'll fix that in a second. But that's going to blur me as it kind of snaps to. And what we want to do is right click. So while we're still in our tool, I want to right click and I'm going to click on the eraser. And with the eraser, I'm going to be able to erase this effect off of me and the spot where I got it on my friend Aaron's head as well. This was shot with a Olympus camera, a little Pen F camera, which is this fun little retro looking mirrorless camera that's made by Olympus. And it yields really nice quality and has some really cool effects that you can apply. But anyways, I've just erased that. Hopefully it'll kind of snap to an adjustment or in a second. And now I'm no longer blurred, but the background has been just subtly blurred a little bit, which is exactly what I'm after. All right. From here, I'm going to click New Mask. And in this case, let's just jump right in. Like I said before, I use control points a lot more often than I use any of the other selective adjustments. It's probably a personal thing, but I also use the Nick collection really often. And so they are sort of just intuitive for me. So control points, right? In this case, all I need to do is kind of clean up some color problems and then maybe darken down the left corner of the image a touch to direct or distract us away from the distracting portions of the photograph. Because the color temperature is pretty skewed on our skin, here it's red and magenta, here it's green because of the lighting in this place, we're going to make a couple different control points to correct those problems. So in this case, her skin is magenta, so I'm going to go ahead and remove some of the tint, and that's going to fix that color for us. I'm going to also cool her down just a touch. As I make these color adjustments, I might find that I actually want to move into the light and brighten her up just a touch. Not too much, but just a little bit. And my idea here isn't necessarily to, fully neutralize skin on us. It's just to kind of clean it up a little bit so that it looks a little bit more natural. So Aaron and I both have similar color casts on us. So what we'll do is rather than making a new selection, I'm just going to go ahead and click, and this is going to drop another control point. So now I have a control point on me, Aaron has a control point on him. We can actually click and drop a couple more control points. And what's happening is that these are kind of supporting control points. That is, they are making the same adjustment as the one we dropped on Carolyn here. So I'm actually going to remove a little bit of the green because I think it's going a little too green. Add a little bit of blue. Long story short, as I click, we can just drop more and more of these control points around. And again, what's going to happen, because I'm adding these sort of supportive control points, is whatever the adjustment we've made on this point will be reflected in all of these other points. So we'll drop one on Matt. That'll sort of clean up that side of his face. Should we decide that we don't like some of these, you can actually click on a point and just tap the delete key on your keyboard to get rid of it. So I don't need these points back here. They weren't actually doing any good for me. So I'll just click and tap the delete button and get rid of it. From there, if we were affecting an area that we didn't want, right? So all of these control points are going in, they're making their selections. This is gonna, oh, by the way, I didn't show you this part. I'm sorry, geez, I should have shown you this part way earlier. So these control points are making selections, right? And they're selections based upon the objects that we've dropped the point on. And what the control point's doing is it's looking for the tone, the color, the texture, the edges of the thing that you place the point on. And it attempts to make a clean photographic looking selection. Well, if you ever want to actually see the selection, you can move into the right side of the interface here into the local adjustments section, and you can actually turn on the mask. I gotta click and hold this. There we go. Oh, maybe because it's an active mask, I'll just click the Show Masks button here. And what we're gonna see here is anything that has white on it is gonna have the selection on it. This actually looks kind of terrifying. Let me turn it off just for a second. So we placed a point on Carolyn, on Matt, me, Aaron's got a couple points on him. If I click the Show Masks button, what this is showing us is anything that has the white on it has the effect. Anything that is not showing up doesn't have any of the effect on it. So anything that's not white doesn't have any of the effect on it. If this control point or our grouping of control points was affecting something we didn't want, you could click this button here, or it's a little control point with a minus sign, and we're able to remove the effect from areas where we don't want it. Like some of the effect is happening on Matt's hand here, maybe you don't want that, so you place a minus control point and you can see the mask kind of snap too. It just removed the effect off of Matt's hands. I don't actually want this point, so I'm going to tap on it, click delete to get rid of it. Now, that's how you show the mask of the active control point. If I wanted to see the mask of that auto mask brush tool that we used, I can just move over to that local adjustments and scroll over it, and it's going to show us the mask. And mind you, this mask, anything where there is that sort of cyan coloring to it is where the effect is going to be applied. Anywhere that doesn't have the cyan effect is where the effect is not applied. You can see I could probably spend another 30 seconds or minute to kind of clean up this selection a little bit too, but it's probably not that important for this webinar at this point. All right, so let's clean up the folks in the back. So I'm going to take a control point, place this one on Amanda's shoulder where it's really green. Nope, I'm not. Sorry, I messed that up. I got to tap the delete key. I have to first click the new mask button. I forgot to do that. So I'm going to click new mask. I'm going to click the control point here, and then I'm going to move in and I'm going to remove the green by adding some magenta. And then I'm also going to maybe warm that a little bit. Actually, it's probably need to be cooled down just a touch. Let's see. And it'll take a second, but that should clean up our color cast that's occurring on her. And like I said before, I don't want to get rid of this color cast entirely because I think it'll look weird if our skin was just fully neutral. It's just there's quite a lot of green on Amanda and Jen back here, and I want to kind of fix that. So what I'm doing is I'm just dropping more and more of these supportive control points on the area that we want. And if I want to see a before and after, I'll just go over to my control points list in the local adjustments, and we can turn those on and off. So here's the before, and here's the after. It'll take it a second. And you can see how it's sort of neutralized all of those areas pretty nicely. I'll put one on Matt's shirt. I'm going to clean this up by just clicking on the compare button. I think I've got to place a couple control points here and there, but I'm running over on time right now. So what we're going to see right now is the before image. My computer's running a little bit slow, so all corrections except local adjustments. And there's our enhanced image, right? So we've basically cleaned this up, and now we have a printable image where our skin tones will still kind of reflect the color of the environment, but print more nicely. I think in the original color it was too saturated and could have been a problem if I wanted to make a nice little print for my friends. Anyways, Lori, that's that for the sort of presentation portion of the webinar. I hope that that construction that's happening isn't too loud too, because I can hear it. It's pretty distracting for me, but hopefully it doesn't get picked up by the microphone.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad on my end. Hopefully not for anybody else. Okay, Daniel, I've got 3 questions for you.
Yeah.
Melissa's asking, After using a gradiated mask, are some areas, can you erase some areas from the mask?
Great question. Yeah. Good. So yes, as far as I know, let's try that right now. So if I click into local adjustments and we add a gradient mask, oops, let me click new mask and then right click to get our gradient or graduated filter. Let's go ahead and click and drop this in here, move this in. And I'm going to darken that down a little bit. Cool, that's good. And let's say we wanted to then erase some of the effect out. What you can do is click the right click so that you get your heads-up display, and then click on your eraser tool, which, by the way, you can do this using the brush or the graduated filter tool. So now, if I was darkening, areas that we don't want or affecting the gradient in a way where we don't want it to be, you can literally just go in and erase the effect out. Or I think you can actually add some of the effect with a brush as well. Let me check that. It's not a tool that I do use this. I erase the effect out of areas like in the gradient pretty often. But let's see if we were to go to the brush tool. We're still adjusting the gradient that's over here, but maybe we wanted to paint some of the effect in there. Yeah, and it looks like it totally will do that, which is actually great. Thank you for asking that. That I just learned a little bit. My computer's moving kind of slow though. So here, I'm gonna watch, you see this zigzag? I've got to give it a second before it actually snaps to. I bet you it doesn't like the fact that I'm trying to do this extensive work while streaming on a webinar. But yes, you can do that. Great question.
Okay, Gary's asking, how can you create a shallow depth of field on a totally sharp image?
Okay, so if we were to go to an image maybe like this, which is shot at like f8 or f11, what was this shot at? f7.1. All right. So that was Gary, Lori?
Yes.
Okay, Gary, that's a good question. I don't know if this is the best way to do this, right? But I would think if we had a really hard gradient tool, so let's go to local adjustments, let's go to the graduated filter, and we just make a really hard gradient, just like this. And this is an image where this actually might work. We might need to just brush out the rocks here and Amanda. But if we do something like this and then go into our blur and increase the blur, and then I think this is going to take a minute, but now we can basically click, right click, go to the eraser, and then do a little bit of a work to erase the effect off of the rocks and off of our subject. But you could do this. I think it's probably more work than you'd want, in which case, try and get that short depth of field in camera when possible. So that's going to take a second to erase the effect off. At least it should. There we go. And I'm going to have to be really careful with where I brush. And I'm going to have to take a second to clean this up. This would be much easier if I had a Wacom tablet, but I think I don't know if this is going to give you the result that you want, Gary. This is just one way of doing it within this software. Let's see what happens if I let that go. Software figures it out. Oh, there's Amanda. Snaps too. So I just need to continue to brush that effect off of her, and then probably even clean it up after that. But it's kind of a fun one. It's definitely would be a cool technique. I think it would just be better off doing it in camera if that's a choice.
Okay, here's our last question. Colin is asking, what's the difference between the temperature and the tint sliders?
Yep, great question. So the temperature slider is the color temperature. Let me just get rid of this for a second. Delete that, click close. I'm on a raw file, so I should have the ability to adjust my color temperature. Okay, so this tool is called white balance, right? And it allows us to balance the color of the resulting raw file in this case, so that it's neutral, or so that we have a creative aspect if we wanted to. That first image that we adjusted had a creative white balance because we skewed the color. The temperature is supposed to pertain to the actual color temperature, Kelvin color temperature of the lighting, and then the tint of that lighting. So temperature is going to be a blue to yellow adjustment, and tint is going to be a green to magenta adjustment. Obviously, I'm not going to leave my tint up at 200. Like I don't know if there's a situation where I've ever had to do that. Maybe with infrared photography, I would skew this quite a bit, but I might cool this image down with the temperature and then bring my tint up just to make the light seem a little bit more magenta. And now we've got like a nice cool blue sky back here, but we've got skin tones that are a little bit more magenta from this, kind of dawn lighting, early morning light.
Great, thanks, Dan.
Absolutely, Lori, that's fun stuff.
I want to thank everybody for joining us today and to encourage you to look on our webinar site. I don't know, Dan, if you could bring that up.
Yeah.
Perfect. So maybe Dan can show you that, and I'm going to go ahead and close out. But thanks, Dan, for a great webinar, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Lori. Okay, cool. So we're on the DxO.com/webinars page. If you just landed on the DxO page, the website itself, you could find the webinars by going to Explore into the webinars. There's also recorded tutorials on the website, which are really quite nice. The upcoming webinars are these. So you just sat in with this one with us today. Thank you very much. On the 30th of March, you've got a webinar about the Deep Prime noise reduction compared to other pieces of software. So Deep Prime is the newest algorithm built into the DxO PhotoLab tool that gets rid of grain, that gets rid of noise that you don't want in your image usually. And it does a really amazing job to get rid of noise but retain detail. Recorded webinars, these are all past webinars that talk about all sorts of different things. So this is a webinar that's a comparison between PhotoLab and Lightroom. Here, this is a webinar that's specifically about the smart workspace and some of the advanced tools and so on and so forth. So there's tons of content for you to check out right on the website. There's also a YouTube page that you can go and check out too, whenever, if you want to watch more, or maybe you go there now and check it out. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Have an absolutely splendid weekend. Thank you, Lori, for having me, and I hope you guys have a good one. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.